Whenever I read this story and think about this truth, it always takes me back to the Elah Valley. I love this valley. This is the valley where the famous story takes place, biblical account of David and Goliath. I love being here, and you can. This is the hillside over here where Israel was camped, and you can just see their fires and their men scattered across that hillside. And over here you can look, and this is where the Philistines would have been camped, and there's this big valley in between. And you can just imagine, as I've sat there, Goliath coming down at night, coming to the edge of the field, maybe walking out in the middle of the field saying, "Send someone to me, you bunch of Israeli," I'm sure it wasn't pleasant. And then you see them over here, and they're like shaking in their boots, right? And there's three responses to fear. We run. I'm afraid of something, so I run. Or I freeze. Or I fight. So what do these guys do? They're not fleeing, right? They're not like, "Oh, that's it, we're going home. He's too big for us." No. They're not going out and fighting. In 40 days, this ends up happening. Then David comes along. Remember David? David's a teenager. David's been out with sheep. David's not old enough to be in the army. He's not old enough to serve yet. He wants to be in, but he can't be. His older brothers are in. You remember he shows up. He sees this whole scene unfolding. And he looks at this Philistine who's standing out here yelling at them. And he says these amazing words. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" Now, you got to understand the Bible, okay? Circumcision was a sign of the covenant of a relationship with God. It's called the Abrahamic covenant. So it was a sign of that. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? In other words, he doesn't have any relationship with God. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine to defy the armies of the living God? And his brothers all look at him and said, "Who are you, punk?" Now you got family conflict, right? But he sees something completely different. He doesn't see how big Goliath is. He's seeing how big God is. And then you remember Saul has this conversation with him, and David, take my sword, take my shield, take all my gear. You're really not big enough to do this. And he's going, "Look, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Bible, the God of heaven has been with me. I've fought against lions and bears, taking care of my family's sheep. This is way more important than sheep. God will deliver him into my hands." And you remember he goes down to the creek. I love standing in this creek. I've been right here. I picked up the 5 stones just like David did. I've held those stones in my hand and I'm like, this is where it happened right here. And you remember he takes those stones and he puts them in his little bag, and he's got a stick, he's got a slingshot, and 5 shots. And then he goes back out to the edge there, and the Philistine is out there and he's doing his thing, and he comes walking out. And you remember these infamous words. I mean, these words are like amazing. This is coming out of the mouth of a teenager. Listen to these words. "Then David said to the Philistine, 'You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted.'" Now, taunted is a word you probably haven't used lately, but it simply means to mock, to slander, to criticize. You've been criticizing God for 40 days. I come to you in the name of that God, the one you've insulted. "This day," I love this. "This day," he's going to say that a couple times. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you." You say, "Well, that isn't very polite talk, Mark." Imagine someone who's in junior high school. Let's just say a 10th grader is talking to someone like this. You would look at him and say, "That's not very nice." Friends, it's not a nice world. You're going to need courageous people who can do courageous things at the right times. That's exactly what he's doing. Goes on and says, "And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth." I mean, the carcasses are going to be laying here. The birds are going to come. I don't know if you've ever seen birds come like that, but they come and they peck their eyeballs out and stuff. I mean, that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen to you today. Then he goes on. "Why is this going to happen? That all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel, and that this whole assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's. He will give you into my hand." And then David does the most amazing thing. He takes off running for all he's worth. I mean, it's charge! I mean, you just got to love this guy, right? I mean, he's just charging him. And he grabs one of the rocks out of his bag, puts it in the stone. He's just running up to him. Whack! Drops the Philistine. He doesn't even have a sword to cut off his head, so he goes and he pulls the sword of Goliath out and he chops his head off. And he holds it up. I mean, this is epic history right here. All right? All right? Any of you guys say amen to this? I mean, come on, you guys. Okay, anyways, all right. So, it's amazing. So he ends up there finding God's victory. What's the difference between the men who were camped up here and David? These men focused on the threats. They didn't manage their fears. David walked by faith. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't foolish. God had been with him in the past. This was a decisive moment, and he trusted God. In decisive moments, manage the fears and trust God, walk by faith.